Hello friends, I am Krishna Kumar and today I am going to discuss about an important theory related to theory of organic evolution. This is theory of natural selection. Theory of natural selection. It is also known as Darwinian theory of natural selection or Darwinism. So this theory was proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859 in his famous work on the origin of a species by means of natural selection. Right, 1859. This was very famous book written by Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin proposed this theory on the basis of his field work, his scientific observation and study of many scientists before Darwin and their contemporary scientists. So in this topic you have to develop some important dimension related to this theory. First is you have to write your introduction, right? Second, you have also mentioned about the methods applied by Darwin for the development of this theory, and then you have to give attention about the main component of this theory, and then you have to give attention about case study, because the role of case study is very important when we try to write our answer in anthropology. You all are knowing that the role of case study is very important for getting high mark in anthropology. And then you have to write about limitations of this theory and then conclusion. This is the standard parameter for the preparation of any theory, any topic related to these types of topic. So first, when you try to write introduction related to this theory, so you can say Charles Darwin proposed his theory of natural selection in his famous work on the origin of a species by means of natural selection in 1859, and therefore it is known as a theory of natural selection. It is also famous as a Darwinian theory of natural selection or Darwinism. Then you have to give attention about that this theory was proposed by Charles Darwin on the basis of his field work and his scientific observation. So Darwin was selected as an important member of scientific expedition in 1831 on ship HMS Beagle. So that scientific expedition was focused to map coastal area of South America, Africa and Australia. So Darwin was selected as a member, as one of the member of this scientific expedition. But Darwin was basically a student of medicine and theology. When Darwin got this opportunity, so Darwin had traveled around South America, Africa and Australia between 1831 to 1836, and Darwin had done field work. Darwin utilized scientific observation method for the study of variation and diversity in nature. So basically, in that period, Darwin had give focus about the study of diversity and variation in nature in Galapagos Island. He gave attention and he observed that there was great variation and natural diversity on Galapagos Island. So he was collected various types of documents related to variation in plant and animal, and after that he returned England in 1836. So first important thing is that these types of idea developed in the mind of Darwin due to their fieldwork, due to their scientific observation on Galapagos Island. But a theory which proposed by Darwin was not only based on this scientific observation. When Darwin returned at England, he started to study about various scientific works done by scientists, many scientists. So he was influenced by the work of Charles Lyell, who wrote a book named Principle of Geology. So Charles Lyell also gives some insight about evolution. Darwin was also influenced by the work of George Cuvier. He was great paleontologist and he had collected many fossils, even fossils related to dinosaurs, and George Cuvier gives some insight about evolution and extinction on the basis of a study of fossils remains. But Darwin was greatly influenced by the work of Thomas Malthus. He was political economist and he wrote a book named An Essay on the Principle of Population. So Darwin influenced by the idea of Thomas Malthus, and he already did fieldwork on Galapagos Island. So Darwin correlated this fieldwork document with these scientific ideas, and therefore before development of these types of theory, Darwin had studied about geology, paleontology, taxonomy, systematics, demography, embryology. He was influenced by many scientists. He was also influenced by Lamarck. He was also influenced by his grandfather Erasmus Darwin. So after all, his idea about evolution was result of combination between his own scientific idea which developed on the basis of scientific observation and fieldwork in Galapagos Island, and on the basis of his studied on various scientists at that time, right? And then Darwin proposed this theory on the origin of species by means of natural selection. So this is the general background related to this theory. But when we study about this theory, so what are the main components related to this theory? So basically this theory was based on some observation and deduction, right? Observation and deduction. Try to understand that thing in right perspective. So first observation proposed by Darwin was all organisms have the potential for explosive population growth that would outstrip their food supply. That was the first observation. But this observation was directly influenced by Thomas Malthus, because Darwin was influenced by the work of Thomas Malthus on the field of demography. But he also observed this phenomena on Galapagos Island. So basically Darwin said that organisms have potential to over reproduction, but food supply is limited. This is the first assumption, this is the first observation. Second, Darwin said that is second observation. Darwin observed that, and Darwin said that when we look at nature, we see populations that are roughly stable. Means, in second observation, Darwin found that populations are stable. So why populations are stable? Why population is stable? So try to correlate with first observation, where Darwin said that all organisms have potential for over reproduction, but food supply is limited. So population is stable due to lack of food supply. Already Thomas Malthus said that population is limited by food supply. That was also concept developed by Thomas Malthus. So on the basis of that two important observation, Darwin gave deduction, first deduction, if that condition present in nature, which Darwin had already observed, that condition was present in nature. Darwin learned that thing from the work of Thomas Malthus. Then Darwin said that if that condition is fulfilled in nature, then there must be a struggle for existence. A struggle for existence. Right? This is very important for us, because that gives us very important insight for understanding of this theory, and try to correlate each observation and their deduction. So Darwin said that populations are stable due to a struggle for existence, because if a food supply is limited, then who survive? Those survive who get proper food. So population is stable due to a struggle for existence. Means organism does a struggle for existence on the basis of, or for the sex, for the food and for natural resources. But third observation done by Darwin, here Darwin said that nature is full of variation. Try to understand that thing. That is very important. Darwin said that nature is full of variation, and variation is the fundamental basic natural attributes of organism. So Darwin claimed that no any organism are similar to each other, even they are belongs from common species. They differ in their anatomy, they differ in their structure, they differ in their behavior. So the role of variation is very important in evolution, because Darwin observed about the natural variation, and on the basis of that variation Darwin said that if nature is full of variation, so there must be some variations are favorable and another are disfavorable. So here Darwin gave us concept about variation and two types of variation, that is favorable and disfavorable. Favorable variation and disfavorable variation. So on the basis of that deduction, lastly Darwin proposed the theory of survival of fittest or natural selection. Survival of fittest or natural selection. Right? So basic thing is that when you try to understand about theory of natural selection, you have to remember about all organisms have the potential for over reproduction, but food supply is limited, and therefore Darwin observed that generally populations are stable. Darwin postulates the theory of struggle for existence on the basis of this assumption, this observation. If organisms have potential for over reproduction and food supply is limited, so there must be a struggle for existence. Then Darwin observed that nature is full of variation. But Darwin also observed that there must be some variations are favorable, another are disfavorable. So on the basis of that, Darwin proposed his theory of natural selection. So Darwin said that in the struggle for existence, those organisms have positive variation, favorable variation. Those organisms survive in the struggle for existence, and those organisms have disfavorable variation. Those organisms does not survive. So Darwin, on the basis of this theory, Darwin proposed that those organisms have favorable variation, that organisms survive in a struggle for existence, and those have disfavorable variation, they did not survive in a struggle for existence. Right? So how that survive? So Darwin explained that survive due to natural selection. So that was the core concept in Darwinian theory of natural selection. Right? Because Darwin said that nature positively select favorable variation and negatively select disfavorable variation. So what is natural selection? Darwin defined that natural selection means differential reproductive success. Differential reproductive success. It means those organisms survive in a struggle for existence. That organism have more potential than those organisms who do not survive in a struggle for existence. So those organisms survive, those organisms inherit his trait in next generation through differential reproductive success. So for natural selection, Darwin also said that for natural selection we required variation. So the role of variation is very important because trait must be variable, or variation is very important. Second important thing is that Darwin also said that trait is inheritable, right? Trait is inheritable. And third, suitability to nature. So this is the theory of natural selection by Darwin. And lastly, Darwin said that how evolution happened due to this process of natural selection, because natural selection work as a filter. Natural selection always positively select favorable variation. That favorable variation inherited from generation to generation or across generation. So due to accumulation of favorable variation from generation to generation, race formed, right? Race formed, and that is the mechanism for evolution, which is known as a natural selection. Basically, when Darwin did their study on Galapagos Island, he observed about the variation among finches bird, and he found that finches shows variation on their beak shape, their strength, their food and their habitats. So on the basis of that, Darwin had postulated this theory, and after that you have to give attention about case study. This is very important for us, because when we utilize case study we will get very good marks. So in 1973, this is very interesting thing, Peter and Roger Murray Grant had done fieldwork in Galapagos Island. He did case study on finch bird, and he also studied about variation in finches. But when they did their study in between 1976 to 1978, there was drought on Galapagos Island. So he observed that those finches birds have larger and strong beak. They survive because they are able to crack and extract hard shelled seed, and therefore their food supply was maintained. But those finches bird have a small beak. They are not able to crack hard shelled seed, and therefore they died due to starvation. So on the basis of that, Peter and Roger Murray Grant said that natural selection work for evolution. So remember that case study, that study is very important for us. And then you have to give attention about limitations. So first limitation was Darwin said that variation, the role of variation is very important for natural selection. But Darwin did not know how variation occur. Second important thing is that Darwin has wrong notion about inheritance, because Darwin believed in blend inheritance, which was proved wrong by Mendel in 1865. So that was the biggest weakness about that theory. But after that limitations, you can write your conclusion. Therefore, there are some limitations about theory of natural selection. But in spite of these limitations, theory of natural selection gives us insight about the mechanism of evolution. And contemporary scientists also believe that it is a central force of evolution, and therefore the work of Darwin is important for the understanding of evolution. So this is Darwin theory of natural selection.